Hello. Today we are doing a different type of video today since I promised I would be doing theological content. This is going to be our first Theological Thursday. I need to really quickly readjust my thing so that it's not covering that. There we go, we're all good. And so today we are going to be going over Moses, and we're going to be going over his history, archaeology, and theology, part 1. And we're going to be going through Exodus 1 through 24. Excuse me. So, let's get started. I'm also going to have chat open so that I can, what's it called again? Respond to you guys if you have anything that you need. I did also cut down on the amount of slides that I was originally going to do because of the fact that what's it called again? There were going to be a lot of slides beforehand, but I just didn't have enough time to get to all of them to make sure that they were all correct and stuff, since I did have to correct a few slides beforehand, since I was not super prepared for this. Let's see. So first we'll be going over the historical culture / background. We'll be briefly talking about Moses, Genesis, and Jubilee, since we are going to do those next, since those are very important to the Moses literatures. We're going to be going through Exodus, the Exodus narrative, chapters 1 through 24. We're going to go through some archaeological debates, LDS perspective, a little bit of contextual notes, and I believe I do have some stuff at the very end where I talked about some good resources. I don't believe I did anything for teaching application. I think I got rid of that one since I didn't have time to go over it fully. Also, where's my pointer? Oh, I guess I don't have a pointer in this version. So first, we'll be going over the historical culture and background. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. So the new kingdom in Joseph, it was most likely the 18th or 20th dynasty, which would be approximately, 1550 BC to 1070 BC. This would be the Egyptian imperial zenith, the height of political power, territory expansion, and cultural achievement. Massive building projects such as the temple at Qatar and Lorex, royal tombs in the Valley of Kings, and colossal monuments rose across the empire. In fact, one of the things about that is that if you were, and this goes into the next point we're about to get to, so if you were an Egyptian citizen, one way you could pay your taxes was by basically doing some indentured servitude and basically helping build up one of these monuments. And then there was different treatment for Hebrew comparatively to most slaves in Egypt, because most slaves still had their human rights and stuff like that, because they were considered Egyptian citizens. The Hebrews were not given this privilege as they were viewed as a threat. And that's why they also had much more stricter laws, even though they did barely any of the work. It was mostly just to make sure that the Hebrews didn't rebel and that they knew their place for the Egyptians. That's how they felt about it. So, when did the Exodus happen exactly? There are two main different dates. We have the early date, which is the biblical chronology. And then we have the later date, which is the 19th dynasty, which I tend to go with the 19th dynasty because it has more archaeological evidence for it. However, you are allowed to choose whichever position you want. However, currently I stay with 1260 to 1250 BC. And then we will be comparing Genesis and Jubilee in the next one, since these will be very relative for our next debate. So keep this in mind for, well, not debate, but our next session. And then now we get to the Exodus. Then I am that I am. we'll get to that in a second. So first, the people who were enslaved, they were the Hebrews, who had exploded in growth in Egypt and were very fruitful and increased in abundance. The new Pharaoh, who knew not of Joseph, perceived Israel's as a demographic and military threat to Egypt's security. Escalating oppression. First, harsher and harsher labors for the Hebrews, and then outright infanticide was decreed. Hebrew midwives like Sifra and Pua practiced courage as they rebelled against Pharaoh by keeping the baby sons alive, and God rewarded them with their family. Rewarded them with families of their own. English, I swear. And then Pharaoh's final genocide order that every son shall be cast into the river was setting the stage for Moses' miraculous deliverance. Anyone got any questions before we continue? I'll give it about 20 seconds. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. Exodus 2:10, the birth of Moses. He had Levite parents, being Amram and Jochebed. They're named in Exodus 6, and he comes from a priestly lineage. He has three months of concealment as an act of faith, defying Pharaoh's three acts of concealment as an act of faith, defying Pharaoh's decree. Talked about in Hebrews. And then the something very interesting is that the reason I put the Ark of I don't think I spelled that right. I meant to put like Brussels. I think is that Brussels. Basically a basket. The reason why that is in why I put that there is because the same word used for Moses' basket is also the one used for Noah's Ark, which is tevah. And tevah is also used to describe boxes and any other form of basically cargo. It's basically sort of like God carrying Moses out through water to basically save him from a disaster, which I thought was kind of interesting. Pharaoh's daughters discover Moses. This was a very big miracle that they found him in the river, because of the fact, in a lot of Egyptian mythology at that time, there were a lot of myths about gods being born of the river and babies being born from the river, and that if you were to see a baby floating down the river, that was a good omen and a sign of good fortune and divine favor. So it was in Pharaoh's daughters' best interest, based off their mythology, to keep Moses alive, which is why it was a miracle. It was Pharaoh's daughters that found him, and not some random Egyptian citizen off the street, because it could have ended very badly if it was someone who was not, I guess, mythologically motivated to protect Moses. And then Nimrah ensured that Moses was nursed by his own mother, which Nimrah was a Israelite servant for one of the daughters of Moses who also helped at that time. And basically said, hey, I know this really good midwife that you could have to help nurse the baby, and basically just suggested Moses' own mother. Okay, so now we go to Exodus 2:11 through 25, flight to Midian. So, in Exodus 2, Moses kills a random Egyptian who was beating a Hebrew. We do not know the name of this taskmaster. This taskmaster never comes up again. He then goes to the wilderness and goes to 40 years as a shepherd, learns patience, humility, and the train he will later lead Israel through, which basically gave him a crucible of preparation and helping him to prepare, sort of like how some other prophets throughout the Old and New Testament also got things that helped them prepare. And then at the well, he defends Jethro's daughters and meets Ziphiron and marries into the priestly family. And this would be like one of the first acts of the reunification of the Canaanites, as Joshua, I believe it was Joshua who ended up finishing the reunification of all the Canaanites into Israel, but I could be wrong. But I want to say it was Joshua. And then he sent, and then it also shows that later in Exodus 2 that God remembers his covenant people. As, what's it called again? I'm trying to think. As the people are praying for deliverance in Exodus 3, which we'll get to in a second, God will go ahead and deliver Moses to the people. Oh wait, that's the wrong way. Exodus 3 through 4. This is where Moses gets his divine commission to go save the people of Israel, and also where we get the telegram, which is I am that I am, or Yahweh. Well, I shouldn't say just Yahweh, but basically the YHWH, which is used for Yahweh and possibly other names based off the biblical archaeology, but we'll get more of that in when we go into Genesis, since the double Yahweh appears more in Genesis than it does in the other books. And excuse me. He says, Ehe Eshra Ehe. I'm sorry if I pronounced that poorly. I am that I am, revealing the name, we'll just say Yahweh for now, the self-existent covenant God who acts in history. The LDS perspective is that Jehovah, or Yahweh, is the premortal Jesus Christ. I am he that gave the law, as we believe that because of statements such as in, I think it's not Moses, sorry, I believe it's John 10:30 something, where Jesus Christ declares himself Yahweh, where he says, I am that I am, basically drawing a reference back to the scene in Moses. And Moses has his 5 objections. Who am I? What is your name? They won't believe me. I'm not smart, or basically I can't talk well, and send someone else. And God answers each of his objections by showing that he is the God of Isaac, Abraham, and Jacob. He tells him that he is Moses. He then also gives him a rod so that people will believe him. He puts lepers on his hands to show that he has real power. And then he sends Aaron as, what's it called again? As a spokesperson to basically help Moses to be able to speak to people. And this is a similar pattern to what we see like with Enoch or Jeremiah or Joseph Smith, where they receive a calling from God. They say, I'm not sure if I can do this, and then they get given a spokesperson. I know Joseph Smith's was Oliver Cowdery, and Jeremiah's was Barak. I don't remember the name of... No, wait, Jeremiah's was Bunich. I think it's Bunich. Bunich, I believe, is how you pronounce it. And then Enoch, I don't remember who his spokesperson was. But I believe he is mentioned by name in the Scroll of the Giants in the Dead Sea Scrolls version, if I'm remembering correctly. I could be wrong, though. Then we have Exodus 5 through 6. The conversation begins. So first, Moses says, let my people go. When Moses and Aaron confront Pharaoh with God's demands, Pharaoh responds with response is defiant. Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice? And he refuses and increases labor demands, demanding brick without straw. And then the Hebrew slaves say, you have made us odious. Israel turns on Moses, putting a sword in their, saying that you have put a sword in their hands to kill us. Leadership is costly. Even Moses cries to God, why have ye done evil to this people? Obedience brings me more suffering than relief. Then God refers to, says, I am Yahweh, and reaffirms his covenants that I will bring you out, I will rid you, I will redeem you, I will take you, I will be your God, I will bring you in, and I will give the land of your inheritance to you. Basically, giving Moses comfort through his trying times. The 10 plagues overview. So we have first the blood, the water to blood, the frogs, the gnats and lice, the flies, the livestock disease, the boils, the hail, the locusts, darkness, and then the death of the firstborn. Each one of these ones, you basically have 3 ones, each acting as basically different stages of punishment. So first, you have the warnings, which these ones are signs that don't cause any real harm, but they show that God is currently objecting to them. Then you have, what's it called again? Basically ones that are a bit more costly, like a bunch of flies going everywhere that stops people from being able to do stuff. You have the livestock disease, which makes it so they have less food. You have the boils, which are really annoying to deal with. Then you have the destruction, where hail starts coming down. You have locusts ravaging the fields. You have straight up darkness. And then you have the climax, where after they wouldn't listen for so long, God finally just acts and takes the firstborn's life. And this is also similar to, number 10 is viewed sort of similar to a typology for Jesus Christ, as he dies as the firstborn for ourselves on the cross during his sacrifice, as he is the firstborn of God, or the beloved Son, and is begotten from the Father. Then we have the plagues. And what was the theological significance of this? It's judgment on Egypt and against all the Egyptian gods, because each one of these plagues specifically targets a specific deities and shows that they don't really have power over them. And then you have different escalations to basically where God's giving tons of warnings till eventually he acts. Then you have signs and wonders, where the plagues were not mere punishments, but they were acts of divine revelation, designed so that Egypt shall know that Yahweh is the Lord. Then, excuse me. Then, from an LDS lens, the plagues demonstrate that the covenant God of Israel has absolute power over all creation, and over all daimons, which a daimon is basically a lower divine being in Greek, and is a testimony that sustains faith across dispensations. And also the reason why I say covenant God of Israel is because that's specifically referring to Jesus Christ, since Jesus Christ is the covenant God of Israel, which we will get into much later, and here when we get towards the end, I believe it's towards the end is when Israel makes the blood covenant to Christ. Yeah, I think it's at the very start of 24, which is at the end of what we're going over today. Then, here's all the different plagues and how they affected the Egyptian religion. So first you have blood to water, which goes after Hapi, the god of the Nile and fertility. The life-giving river turned to death, basically saying, I killed your life-giver. Then you have the frogs versus Heqept. I think I pronounced his name poorly. Who's a frog-headed goddess and birth of children and renewal. Her sacred creatures made loathsome. Then you have... why the frick is number 10 highlighted? We're not even going to judge that one. Then you have the gnats and darkness, which this one goes against Khepri and Ra. The scarab god of dawn and the supreme god of the sun, which are basically having their creations, which would be beetles, and light itself extinguished, basically taking away both their domains. Then you have livestock disease, which would be Horth and Apis, which is the cow goddess of love, and the sacred and Apis is a sacred bull. Egyptians' most venerated animals struck down immediately. You have boils, which goes against Skemet, which is a lion-headed goddess of healing and preservation, powerless to protect her own people. And then you have death of the firstborn, which goes against Pharaoh, which is the son of Ra. Pharaoh's claim to divine sonship from Ra, and now that his son has basically been killed, basically it's Yahweh saying, I have power over Ra, and even Ra can't stop me. So then we have the Passover, which I believe this is when Passover is instituted for the first time, which they they select lamb on the 10th Nisan that's unblemished and 1 year old, and they set it apart for 4 days. Then they applied the blood. Then they applied the blood to the doorposts and lintels. Excuse me. This sign keeps the angel of death from killing their firstborn, and shows the sign of the covenant. Then they roast lamb with unleavened bread, and have bitter herbs, and eat in haste. Their loins girded up, their sandals on, and staff in hand. And each one of the different things that they eat in this specific scene too, each represents a different thing. Like, I believe the bitter herbs represent the bitterness of bondage, if I remember correctly, but I don't remember the other ones. And then, when I see the blood, I shall pass over you. God himself acts as a deliverer and judge. It establishes as a preparatory ordinance, a living memorial reenacting across all generations, since Passover will be practiced for a long time after. And then this would put an end to the 430 years in Egypt. And God would fulfill his covenant of freeing Jacob's people. And then Passover is a typology for Christ, where you have the unblemished lamb representing, behold the Lamb of God, which would be Jesus Christ. You have the blood being representative of the blood that Christ shed on his atonement. And something I will mention too is that the blood that Christ shed for his atonement, since he sweated it a lot, would have probably been on him and gone on his cross and basically been paid over on his cross on the beam of it, sort of like how the doorpost had blood painted on it. It was just something interesting I thought of before, before I started stream. Then they ate in communion, which we eat sacrament in communion. There was no broken bones in either Exodus or when Jesus was crucified. And there was deliverance from bondage in Egypt. And through Jesus Christ's sacrifice and resurrection, we have deliverance from sin and death. The departure. So after God claimed what he saved, redeeming them from death as his own, all those who were firstborn who survived thanks to the blood basically made it out. Then they did not go to the way of the Philistines, which the Philistines, by the way, for those who don't know, were the Greeks. Early Greeks, I should say. They are basically like pre-Greeks, if that makes sense. And they would go into the wilderness towards the Red Sea, and chose God's long, formative route: a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. A pillar of fire by night was a divine guide that was continually leading them forward and basically guiding their way. Sort of similar to how Mori Yankimer, when he led the people when he led his group out of Samaria, God followed a cloud that God used to guide him. which we will probably do a episode dedicated to Mori Ankamer, but not at the moment. Today we're just doing the Exodus. Then Pharaoh's Pursuit, where they trapped Israel between the sea and the army, and this was the ultimate moment of crisis, when Moses would then split the sea. I did originally have a thing for it, but was going off the side, so I guess when I got rid of it, I forgot to combine it with this one, but this one should say split the sea, and they basically were able to escape, and the sea then closed up and swallowed up on all the troops that had crossed over onto the land, and basically saved them. Oh, I did have the crossing of the Red Sea. It literally happens right after. So we have the biblical account where God sends a strong east wind at night, driving back the waters. Israel crosses on the dry land, with walls of water on either side, and returning sea destroys Pharaoh's pursuing army. And then there are some guesses as to where Yam Sur is, which means Sea of Reeds, which some people interpret as the Red Sea, which I choose to, but some other proposed locations include Gulf of Suez, and the Gulf of Aquak, and the Aqaba. There we go, I pronounced it right. And the Lake of Timsah in I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. The debate remains open as we don't have too much archaeological evidence. And that gets us to our third point. There is no archaeological evidence. We have no physical direct evidence of the crossing. And even though there have been even though there have been claims of chariots found underwater that have been later disproven as coral and stuff like that, just because we don't have really much evidence doesn't mean that the thing didn't happen. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And especially since the Exodus happened so long, and so many of the things described in it were very destructive things, we can assume based off that there was a high likelihood that, a lot of the artifacts from there would have been destroyed from the ensuing things, especially the wood, for example, of the chariots, since chariots were made of wood and metal. If there was a good chance that metal is rusted away and the wood rotted away because of how corrosive seawater can be. That's why we don't find many sunken ships and stuff like that past the 1st century, I believe, because so many of them are just whittled to nothing before we can find them. And the LDS perspective is that we historically affirm that the crossing did literally happen, and we do believe that the Lord invoked his power for that. And it's mentioned a few times in First Nephi and in D&C. And then after that, we had the Song of the Sea. The Lord strengthened it. The Lord is my strength and song, and He is become my salvation. This is one of the oldest poetic passages in the Hebrew Bible, dated by scholars in the earliest layers of Israelite literature. And we also have Merida's song, which Merida would be one of the first female prophetesses of the 5th dispensation, as there weren't, and she's also one of the few examples of female prophetesses, because there really aren't that many mentioned throughout the different scriptures. And a cool LDS insight is that the Hebrew word Navi, or habitation, in the song foreshadows the tabernacle and temple as God dwelling among his covenant people. This is very interesting. You have put a lot of good information here. Thank you, Amanda. I try my best. So, manna from heaven. So we have, first, people begin murmuring like they tend to do when stressed in a lot of the scriptures, and they start idealizing their bondage in Egypt and saying that Israel going to Israel is too hard. So that God provides manna to help them on their journey, which something pretty funny is that let me go to my notes so that because I don't have this remembered off the top of my head, but manhu, which is the word that manna comes from, means what it is. So basically, the manna is what it is, which is kind of funny. It's literally bread from heaven, which is which they're trying to clarify in that Hebrew, which I find somewhat hilarious. Then you have a doubled portion on the sixth day. That way they can do Sabbath observance, which was established before Sinai and before I believe it's called the Book of the Covenant or the Book of the Law was made, which is in Exodus 20 through 23, I want to say. I have another site on it, so I'll get back to that. Then you have manna preserved in pots as a testimony, as there's a golden pot of manna kept before the Lord, which serves as physical evidence of divine faithfulness for future generations. And then this is also a typology for Christ, as Christ declares himself, I am the bread of life, basically referring to manna, and specifically the city he did that in. They had the specific city that Jesus declared himself, I am the bread of life in. Their culture was very, very heavily dependent on bread in that specific city. And bread was like everything to them. Basically, bread was their life. So Jesus saying, I am the bread of life, was basically saying, I am your everything in that specific city, which I find kind of interesting. Let's go on to the next slide. So now we have the water from the rock and the Amalekites. So the Israelites thirsted, and they didn't really have any good source of water in that specific area, so God commanded Moses to strike a rock. And when he struck the rock, water poured forth from the rock. And Paul revealed the deeper meaning that the rock was Christ. Basically being that Christ gave him the power when he asked for it to basically have water come out of that rock. And something I would also like to mention is that there is a believed or proposed archaeological site of a rock that has a stream continuously flowing out of it, but there's nothing confirmed on it yet, but I thought it's a cool piece of archaeological information. Then we have the battle with the Amalekites, where Joshua leads a fight below while Moses lifts his hands above on the hill above, and when his arms fall, the Amalekites will prevail. So Aaron and Hur each hold up a arm until the sun sets and Israel triumphs. Basically, Aaron and Hur at that moment help the prophet, because even though the prophet can do a lot of stuff with the power that God gives him, he still sometimes needs help from others too, because just as all humanity, he is not perfect. And this is also another typology pointing to Christ, where you have the divided rock being the source of the living water, and you have Moses raising his arms, foreshadowing intercession, that no one prevails alone, and victory requires both divine power and communal support, which I thought was kind of interesting. And also, another typology I just thought of, you could also put this to, is that just as Aaron and Hur hold up Moses' arms, Jesus Christ holds up our arms whenever we're in what's it called again? Our battles with Amalekites, if you will, for this analogy, and helps us get through it till the very end. So now the next thing we have is Exodus 18. Oh, I accidentally didn't shrink that gold thing correctly. Oh well. The Jethro Council. During the Jethro Council, Jethro, or Rusala, visits Moses and brings his two sons to And Zephora and Moses' two sons are brought to the wilderness camp, and they basically have a family reunion, and which is very good for them. Then non-Israelites, non-Israelites, so the other Canaanites, such as Jethro's people, start worshiping Yahweh and acknowledging his divine power. And then, what's it called again? And then also Jethro and some of the other Canaanites see that Yahweh does good and that he's good for his people. And also that Moses is able to judge the people from morning up until the evening. And then we have the delegation of the thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens, where Jethro proposed a tiered system capable of God, that's capable for God-fearing rulers, and it's basically sort of like one of the earlier versions of the priesthood order for them at that point, since the priesthood order would not be established for a while. Then part 3, we have Sinai and covenants. Ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So then we have the theophany at Sinai, which is one of the most dramatic appearances of God in the Old Testament, where a third month after departure, Israel's camps at the foot of Sinai, the mountain of God. God's proposal: if they obey my voice, ye shall be particularly treasured unto me above all people. And 3 days of consecration, where they wash their garments and set bounds around the mountain, so no one may touch it. And in Exodus 9, thunder, lightning, and thick clouds, temporal blasts, and fire and earthquakes appear, and the mountain begins to tremble as Yahweh descends. And one of the other things that's really interesting about this is that Yahweh was viewed by the Canaanites as basically a storm god or a thunder god. So this not symbolism, but these signs that he's showing is basically showing to the Canaanites that would have been in the camp that it was truly Yahweh that they were following. And only Moses ascends, while the people stand afar. And this is sort of similar to like the temple boundaries that you had in the Old Testament, like where the high priest would go into the veil alone to do his ceremonies, on like the Day of Atonement and stuff like that. And then we have Sinai as a temple, where these are comparisons between the tabernacle and temple and Sinai. You have Mount Sinai, where the summit the summit is for Moses alone with God, and then you have the Holy of Holies, which is where the high priest alone goes alone once per year. Then you have part way up Aaron and the elders, and then you have the holy places in the temple, where priests perform daily ministry. Then you have the base, where the people of Israel are, and then you have the outer courtyard, where the congregation gathers, or basically low church. Whereas where it'd be basically like low church for modern LDS. Then you have the clouds and glory covering the mountain, and then you have the cloud-filled tabernacle, where there's a bunch of tapestries and stuff like that to represent the cloud fills, and also a bunch of like different veils and stuff like that, which we will get into the tabernacle next thing, because that is in 25, and the construction of the tabernacle is really cool. Then we have the Ten Commandments, which are go as follow. You shall have no other God before me, no graven images, do not take God's name in vain, remember the Sabbath, honor thy father and mother, do not kill, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, and do not covet. So some of these are pretty straightforward, but some of these aren't as straightforward in the English, so I'm going to give a quick explanation of each one. So, no other gods before me means that you are not to worship any of the other daimons or lesser divine beings. You are only to worship the one true God of Israel, which was Yahweh at the time. Or as we now call him, Jesus Christ, who is our Lord and Savior, and only through him we can reach the Father. Who the Father is mentioned as the highest God, which the Father is mentioned a little bit in the books of Moses directly as El Elyon, but that's more so in Deuteronomy, which we'll get to at a later conversation. Then no graven images is basically saying you shall have no idols. Like any idols of any form. Like for example, what the Israelites did that was a big problem was, and the reason why Moses had to destroy the higher laws first before he gave the Ten Commandments, was they made a golden calf. Which most people think, oh, that's just an idol to a different cow god. But actually, the golden calf is based off of Aleph, which is the first Hebrew letter, and it's a representation of God, and it comes from a bull. So the reason why they made the golden calf was basically to be a representation of Christ, but they were worshiping the idol instead of praying to Christ himself. So the issue wasn't the fact that the statue was built, but rather that they were putting their worship into a physical object, rather than praying to God himself and treating God as a person, which is why it's an issue. Because we're supposed to have a relationship with God, not worship idols in God's place. Then, to not take God's name in vain. This one is specifically talking about those who make the covenants, like with the garment and stuff like that, that they are not supposed to take God's name in vain. That's also why later in Exodus it talks about how what's it called again? That the priest basically took on the four holies, or the four pieces of Christ's name, which would be on their garment. Then remember the Sabbath. That one's pretty straightforward. It's to remember the Sabbath day and treat it special since it is the Sabbath day. Then honor your father and mother is also pretty straightforward. Be nice to your parents and honor them. Do not kill. Pretty straightforward, which is to not just randomly go and kill someone, which I should note, the command to do not kill is specified for do not murder, which do not murder means to not kill the innocent. If you kill in self-defense or something like that, that would not violate this command. That's why they still obviously killed the Amalekites and other Canaanite enemy troops later down in the line. Since the command was more so do not murder or kill the innocent. Do not commit adultery, once again very straightforward. Do not steal, once again very straightforward. Do not bear false witness, which the caveat on this one is do not bear false witness to your fellow men, since you're not going to get in trouble for example, for lying to a Nazi about the Jews in your attic, because that's not what it was referring to when it says do not bear false witness. It means that you shouldn't deceive your fellow man, so people that are your allies. Like, you shouldn't go lie to your mother about where you were all last night if you went to a party or something like that. You're supposed to be honest with her. It's not saying that you can't lie to protect someone, to an enemy to protect one of your allies. That is still allowed. And to not covet, which to not covet is basically don't be jealous or try and be envious of someone else's things, or to lust after other things more so than you think of God. And to basically just have self-restraint is basically what it's saying. And now the commandments in an LDS context. Abedai quotes the Ten Commandments to the priests of Noah, which is a bold prophetic confrontation that ends up costing his life. Then you have The law of Moses is a type of thing to come, and as every commandment is pointing forward to the atonement of Christ, as Christ will fulfill the law. Then you have modern, what's it called again? A modern restatement of the Sabbath and commandment principles, that to love God, serve Him, keep the Sabbath day holy. Then LDS emphasizes key insights that the commandments are covenant obligations, not just mere rules. They bind us in a relationship, and a mutual promise with God, rather than just being a set of laws that we just have to follow. Then we have the Book of the Covenant, which this is basically like the law book for Exodus, where we have the civil laws, where they do slave regulations, and I don't know how to pronounce that word, but basically what the rights of Hebrew servants had and stuff like that. Then you had personal injury claims and stuff like that, like eye for an eye. Then you had property damage, theft, and restitution obligations. And then you had liability for negligence. Then you had the moral and religious laws, which were protection of the widows and orphans and strangers, just as because rooted in Israel, as it's rooted in Israel's own memory, as they were once strangers of other lands. Then you have honest dealings, be truthful in your dealings and stuff like that. Just courts, no bribery or partialism to the rich or the poor. And compassion as a covenant duty. As you were once a stranger in Egypt, you are to be compassionate to strangers among you. And then you have the church or worship laws, which was the Sabbath year, where the land rests every 7 years, for the poor and windful, unleavened bread for like Passover, harvest slash weeks, then which were like summer harvest weeks, and then you had ingatherings and tabernacles. And you also had a few festivals too that were thrown in the mix of that. Then you have the key laws protecting the vulnerable. Thou shalt not vex a stranger, for ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. Basically saying to treat foreigners with compassion and kindness rather than just being cruel to them for no reason. If thou afflict widows and orphans, thy wrath shall wax hot. Basically saying that don't treat orphans and widows as lesser than yourself, as otherwise God will have His wrath go on you. No interest on loans for the poor. Basically, you are to lend. You are to basically help people in need rather than require them to pay you extra for it and stuff like that they can't pay back. Basically, don't be a loan shark and help the poor, but also don't just expect the poor to take everything, because it's still a loan. They will pay you back, but basically help them to get back on their feet rather than taking from them as they start to get back up on their feet. Then return a cloak taken and pledged before nightfall, so that people may have coverings or raiment over their skin. Basically saying don't leave people to sleep up in the streets with nothing and stuff like that, to treat people with respect. And then you have King Benjamin's sermon, where he talks about this, and he says, were we all not beggars? And care for the poor is not just a optional generation, but something that is covenantally obligated and something that we have to do. That's why LDS followed the law of consecration, where we give a tithe as part of that oath, but we also are to protect the innocent and help the needy when we can. That's why one of the main things for our food pantry, the Bishop's Storehouse, one of the main things it does is not only does it give food to the poor, but the other thing that they help with is that they help get people back on their feet with their self-reliance program. Because teach a man to fish is much more valuable than giving a man a fish. Because if you give a man a fish, he will eat for a single day. You teach a man to fish, he will eat every single day. Now the covenant meal. And they saw the God of Israel, and upon the nobles of the children of Israel he laid not his hands, and did eat and drink with them. So I had to split this slide into two separate slides because I did not have enough space to fit it, so bear with it. So this is part one, where you have the covenantal ceremony, where the people make an oath, where Moses recites the law, and the people respond with one voice, "All that the Lord has said we do, and be obedient." And there was then an altar and 12 pillars erected. Moses writes that they built it at the foot of Sinai, each one of the pillars representing one of the different tribes of Israel. Then you have the covenant blood, where they gave a burnt offering and sacrifice, and Moses sprinkles blood upon the altar, and the people declare, "Behold the blood covenant," and basically declare their loyalty to the God of Israel. And something also interesting to note at that time is that during that time, they believed that blood was basically the life of every creature and thing. That's why in Leviticus it says you're not to drink it, and that's also why in I think it's the Armenian life of Adam and Eve, Cain drinks the blood of Abel as he's trying to gain Abel's life. And basically that's why that giving the blood on the altar is such a important symbolic thing, because they're basically pledging their life to their God. And then they saw God and did eat and drink with him. Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, I think that's how you pronounce it, and 70 elders ascended the mountain, and they beheld God. And beneath his feet was a pavement of sapphire, and they did eat and drink in his presence. And this is one of the few examples of, what's it called again? Of God showing his face to a person. And something I'd also like to note is that up until, like, I believe 300, I want to say it was 300 BC, around the time of the Maccabees. Before that, people took this very literally. And then after the time of the Maccabees, when the Pharisees would start to rise up and stuff like that, they would then come to the idea that no one could see the face of God. But up until then, it was believed that you could see the face of God, like we believe today, that you can still see the face of God. And then eating with God, the theological implications of that. First, you have a covenantal ratification meal. In ancient Near Eastern treaty practices, sharing a meal was a sacred agreement between parties. Eating together in God's presence ratified the Sinai covenant. Oh, excuse me. Then you have seeing God and living, where they were able to see God, which was very extraordinary, because people for a long time, it's just cool to see God in the first place, and then in later traditions, people would think that you couldn't even see God, so being able to be one of the people who saw God would have been super sick. And then you have the blood of the covenant, where the blood represents them basically pledging their life, and it also echoes Jesus' Last Supper, where when he's put on the cross, he spills his blood for, and when he goes to Gethsemane, he spills his blood for us, basically making a covenant for us. Then you have temple connections, where we have the endowment ceremony, where basically we are given the garment, which the garment, for those who don't know, represents the blood of Christ, which we are to put on ourselves, basically representing Christ's atonement and stuff like that. Then we have the dating debate, whether it was 146 BC or 1260 BC. You have Kings 1, which places Exodus 480 years before Solomon's temple, and Judge chronologically supports it between Exodus and monarchy. And you have a lot, and then you have what's it called again? Those two is Pharaoh. I'm not gonna even attempt to pronounce their names. And some LDS scholars have discussed this as a viable time frame. However, I go with typically the earlier 1260 BC because of the fact that Ramses is named specifically. You find tons of Israelite settlements and other stuff archaeologically around this time period. You have a stela talking about this, and the majority of archaeological evidence is typically within this time range. So that's why I tend to believe this one over the 1446 one. Then key archaeological sites. You have the Pi Ramsey or Qatar, which is a site of basically the Capitol building under Ramses II, and is identified as a storehouse in Exodus 1. Excavations revealed massive piles of mud brick construction, bronze workshops, chariot stables, and other things that would have been consistent with Corvée labor laws that the Israelites would have been under. Then, for possible Sinai locations, you have like 3 different ones. You have Jebel Musa, which is just traditional. Then you have Jebel Al-Lizah, which is a controversial but popular place a lot of archaeologists suspect. And then you have, then you have Har Korah or Negev, which the Hebrew word Negev has a special meaning, which means, let me go over here, it basically means south or the dry lands, which I think would be very fitting for Mount Sinai since it was very dry up until that rock was split. Let me go back to my slides. Then for northern Sinai's oasis, you have different points like Karadesh and Tel E Quadrant, where they've uncovered tons of iron fortifications and other signs of basically life and stuff like that. And then also within Negev, you have the Tibia Valley, which has Egyptian copper mines and stuff like that, where there is a mandated sanctuary with stones and textile fragments that offer a rare archaeological parallel with the tabernacle's design, which is why people also suspect that one too. And then, as for faith and evidence as an LDS, we approach the Bible and all Scripture, for that matter, as not infallible things, but rather very good things, or God-breathed. They are life-giving things to help further our testimony. But that doesn't mean we can't also use archaeology and science to also help faith in our testimony, as we are not to be blind but gain our faith through logic and reason, which is why I choose to use the collective witness model, which is basically where we take the whole of all scriptures, all the prophets' writings, basically every single little thing we have, and we take all of that, and we take what the majority of the collective with the most authority says about it. So, for example, if Jesus were to declare, there's, we go to church on Tuesday, for example. If Jesus were to declare that, and the other apostles said, no, we go on Sunday, we would go with Jesus because Jesus outranks them in authority. But if, say, we have 5 different books from prophets with equal authority, and 4 of the books claim that Mori Ankh-Mar lived in Sumeria, and one of the books claims that he lived in Uzbekistan. The one that has authority in that case are the 4 prophets, because even though they have the same amount of authority, the 4 prophets are in agreement, whereas the one isn't. But the other ones should still be for consideration and to be looked into. Now, say you have the same situation, but we find archaeological evidence of Moriyankimur in Uzbekistan, then we would go with the one guy because we have actual evidence to back him up, if that makes sense. And so, obviously, I just mentioned we affirm the scriptures, and I talked about the collector's witness. Some great sources that I personally love are Jerry Grover. He does a lot of great stuff on Book of Mormon research, and he was also the guy who was able to decipher Reformed Egyptian in his, I believe it was 2014 or 15 paper, the character documents and ancient calendars, which we should do a video on that. For our next Theological Thursday, actually, we are going to do we're going to just do a deep dive on his Reformed Egyptian paper project, because that one was really cool, and as someone who's autistically obsessed with language, I loved it. So we're going to have to do that for our next Theological Thursday. And then Elder B. H. Robertson's also got a bunch of great research he's done. And there are also other people who aren't necessarily of the church, like you have Mark Driscoll's work. What are other biblical scholars I can remember by name? I can't remember any others by name, but there are a bunch of great biblical scholars that have done a bunch of great research into this that I would highly suggest any faithful LDS member go check out. And lastly, coming up is the Book of Moses, Genesis, and Book of Jubilees for our next Moses history, archaeology, and theology thing, where we go over the 5 different books of Moses. I think that's the end. Yep, that's the end. It was a good stream, and I'm going to give about 4 minutes worth of time for people to respond with any questions they might have before we end stream. And if no one chats within... Actually, we'll do 1 minute. If no one chats within 1 minute, we'll go ahead and end stream. And if you guys have any other things you want me to cover in the future, or stuff like that, comment it under the VOD when it gets posted to Rumble and YouTube. And I will go over any things you guys have questions on. If you and we'll do whatever, basically. If you guys want me to do something different, but if not, I'm going to continue with working on my next presentations for the Reformed Egyptian one and the next things in our Moses series. And it looks like there has been no questions, and a minute has passed. So I'm going to assume no one has questions. Thank you guys for joining me for this wonderful stream, and I hope to see you guys, what's it called again? Next, tomorrow for my Minecraft stream. And it has been a lovely day, and have a lovely Thursday, and have a sacred Sunday. Bye!